So welcome. My name is Peter Feaver, and I'm a professor of political science and public policy here at Duke, and I'm also the director of the Triangle Institute for Security Studies and the American Grand Strategy Program, which is hosting this event. While I've got you here as a captive audience, I want to do some advertising, and then we'll get to our main event. We're in the midst of a number of great talks, the one you've come to, and then on Monday, we're bringing Reince Priebus, who was Chief of Staff, White House Chief of Staff under President Trump for the first half of the year. And we imagined, wouldn't it be great if we had them there on the same day? And that proved impossible to pull off. But they're on the same poster, and so we're viewing them as a twin event. And then the day after, on December 5th, Victor Cha, who is one of the leading experts in the country on the Korean Peninsula security crisis, rumored to be tapped to be ambassador to South Korea by President Trump. And if you've been reading the news, you know it's an extraordinarily timely time to be talking about Northeast Asian security. And so that's on Tuesday. And if this is all news to you, you've never heard about this stuff, please sign up and get on the AGS mailing list, and you will find out more about it. But you found out enough to come tonight to the Dave and Kay Phillips family international lecture, and we're very fortunate to have Dave and Kay and their lovely daughter here in the audience with us. Thank you, Dave and Kay, for your generosity, which made this possible. And you came to hear my friend, John Podesta, who for decades now has been one of the leading political figures in the country. He has served at the highest levels in the Clinton administration, Clinton White House, and then again in the Obama administration as counselor in the White House. And then he was the head of Hillary for President campaign. And I've read somewhere that he bakes a mean risotto. I don't know how I found that out. But
except you don't bake risotto.
Oh, you don't? Well, that's
so she's not a cook.
I'll have to go back and read that email more carefully. But John, welcome to Duke. Thank you for coming.
Thanks, Peter.
So, John, what we want to talk about tonight is where are we and how did we get here? And we're going to dig into that. But what kind of top-line answer would you give? Where are we and how did we get to this point?
So you're probably expecting me to say the Russians stole the election and we're in a heck of a mess.
Yeah. Well, I'll give you if you want.
I'll give you a more serious answer. Look, I think the country was in a place of transition. There was a lot of rise of a sort of a populist sentiment. It was born from the fact that since I served in the Obama White House, but since I left the Clinton White House, wages for working people hadn't gone up. The middle class wages had kind of gotten stuck. Certain places were doing great. We largely won those places. And a lot of places were feeling, I think, left out and left behind. And candidate Trump, Donald Trump, tapped into that. Ran a vigorous campaign and tried to tap into the anger that was out there and was able to turn enough votes and win enough votes in 3 states, which we expected to win, Wisconsin, Michigan, and Pennsylvania, that gave him the presidency. Hillary got 3 million more votes nationally than he did, but he was able, I think, to run a campaign of anger, not really a campaign of hope, sort of in a way a complete rejection of what President Obama had done for 8 years, and it worked where it needed to work, I guess, is what is the bottom line. I think that she would have made a great president. I think she ran a dignified and honorable race, but he won. And so where we are is with a person who I think really breaks, and particularly in conversation with you, thinking as much about where the U.S. is globally than on domestic affairs. He's broken from a very long tradition of 13 presidents that accepted the mantle of global leadership and built a standing in the world for the United States that was built around a kind of a value structure and value system that said that we are going to try to build a safer, more secure world around alliances, and will restrain some of our power in so doing. He's pursuing a different strategy, one of, as I said, populism, but one of nationalism. And I think the world's trying to figure out where the United States is right now. How did they elect him? And what's he doing going forward? What's his strategy?
Well, let's dig into the past part, and then we'll get into the present part later. So when you were surveying the field of potential Republican challengers, who, I'm thinking now 2015 or even 2014, who did you think was your most formidable foe, and where did Trump rank in that list of people to fear, candidates to fear?
I said this to him once, and he wanted me to say it publicly, but I wouldn't do it. I probably thought the person who matched up best against her was John Kasich. That he was coming into the race as a successful governor, kind of has a personality that's appealing to people, and both had some breadth and depth. And he proved to be, I think, more formidable in a way. He was kind of last man standing in a sense. I guess Cruz was officially, but I thought Trump, though, was a serious candidate for early on. And I think we took him more seriously than the Republican field took him in the early days. I kind of think of him in the sports metaphor as a left-handed boxer. You weren't sure what you were going to get. And you knew that he was going to mix things up in a way that was unpredictable and as proved to be true, both in the primaries and in the general election. And that he was willing to say and do anything. And I guess the moment that I thought that this guy has staying power and he's able, even as despicable as I thought the comment was, he's able to kind of rise or live in a gravity-free world where nothing pulled him down, was when he did the crack about John McCain and said,
Summer of 15.
That was the summer of 15. I think it was August of 15.
Right.
When he said, I like winners, I don't like losers, I don't like the people who got caught, who got, captured. And like for any normal politician, that's a career ender, right? Would you agree with that?
I thought
I thought for the first 6 hours, that was going to be a career ender for him. He stuck with it. His people rallied to him. I think they I don't know what they found to be likable about that, but they liked it. And
McCain was unpopular with
mainstream with conservative Republicans.
With conservative Republicans, right? Who felt that he had lost in 2008 when shouldn't have lost.
Yeah,
and that kind of thing. So that might have fed it. But you're right. So, but from that point on, you were taking him seriously, or. So what is taking him seriously?
We thought he could, we thought that he had by the late fall going into our start of our real primary season, I think that most of the top people in the campaign thought this was largely likely to come down to a fight between Cruz and Trump. And it was, I think we probably thought Cruz would win that, and that the mainstream Republicans would rally to Cruz, even though nobody likes him, in order to stop Trump. But that didn't happen.
So during this time, though, you had your own Donnybrook within the Democratic Party. Did you anticipate that would be as hard for Secretary Clinton to win?
I think we thought that Senator Sanders was a very serious candidate. I've worked for insurgent candidacies and got my start in politics. I've done this for a really long time. I started in 1968 working for Eugene McCarthy. So I know what the power of an insurgency...
Was this before or after you had I was just heard from Richard Riddell that you occupied the dining hall or something in your college at Knox College. So you were a rabble-rouser from the beginning, is what you're
Absolutely.
saying. You understood...
Anti-war activist, let's put it that way. It was clear that Bernie had something going, that in the Democratic primary system, that an insurgent who has a loyal, strong following can be a credible candidate. But I think we always felt like we had the right path to victory, and we thought, I was talking to some students earlier, our coalition was bigger than his coalition. And that proved to be true. There's a lot of, I think, revisionism going on right now. But Hillary got 3.7 million more votes than he did, won primaries, dominated really in the primaries, and didn't win just here in North Carolina and New York, but won Massachusetts and California, won in very liberal places. When there was a large turnout, Bernie won some primaries in New England. He won Michigan and won Wisconsin, but his strength was really in the caucus states, and where the most committed activists tend to dominate the process in those caucus states. But we still had, I think more than 400 pledged delegate lead on him. We didn't win this campaign by going to the super delegates. I think we won it fair and square, and that's because she had a very broad appeal, and she had a committed, strong following that were willing to come out and work and help her as well.
So, but what, just from the other side of the aisle, it was odd to think that after 8 years, where Democrats controlled the White House, that they might hand the nomination to someone who was a card-carrying socialist whose critique of Obama was he wasn't to the left enough after 8 years of power. From the other side of the aisle, that looked odd.
I think it was.
Does that suggest there was weakness or rot, if you will, or something inside the Democratic Party?
No, I think it was running in the same stream, which is, although Senator Sanders' voters were they were definitely very different than Donald Trump's, but he had a combination of traditional, more liberal white voters, and then he had he did better in the same demographic, I would say, that I was describing as the key conversion for Trump, which were working class white voters concentrated in the industrial Midwest. We got our fair share of those, but I think that he was driving at the same issues that Trump played out on, which was the system's rigged, it's rigged against you, your lives aren't getting better, your wages aren't going up, and socialism, much more activist intervention than what President Obama was promising, is the answer to that solution. I think Hillary was making a different argument, which is that Obama inherited a complete and total mess, the biggest recession since the Great Depression, and had worked his way out of that and had built an economy that was finally producing jobs, and by 2016 was probably starting to produce some real wage growth for individuals. And that while she had ideas that went well beyond what Obama had proposed on the economy, that sticking with a progressive path that was more centered in where Obama had been, where Clinton was in perhaps in the 90s, building a middle-out economy, trying to concentrate on job creation, getting wages growing was the right answer to the country's problems.
So, do you think there was anything Sanders could have done differently that would have changed the outcome? For instance, if he hadn't said, "I don't care about those damn emails," and had in fact gone after her on the email server, would he have changed the trajectory of the Democratic primary?
I doubt it. I don't think so. I mean, you can't do counterfactuals, I think.
We do them in political science, but I take your argument that they're hard to be persuasive on it, yes.
I think that he did that. I think that in the end of the day, that was, in some ways, he was trying to run a campaign that was both authentic to him and was a little bit different. And I think he got credit for saying that, actually. I don't think it hurt him. Came back to it a little bit at the end, maybe regretted the decision towards the end. But after, by the time the New York primary happened, which was the third week in April, I think, the election was over, essentially. I mean, he kept fighting through the California primary, but the popular vote and the pledged delegate vote was done. I think had he gone after her on that, it would have been it wouldn't have fit his personality, and so I think it would have had a hard time executing the attack, and I don't think he would have won many Democratic votes, because I don't think people by that time, it was kind of an old news story, and I think by that time they had resolved in their own minds that this was important or it wasn't, and it was she had said it was a mistake, and I think most Democratic voters were willing to move on and didn't think it was that big of a deal.
So the critique from Donna Brazil's book, and that suggests that maybe the race was over even before that the fix was in. Well, that may be mischaracterizing her argument, but what do you think about...
It doesn't mischaracterize her headline.
Yes, exactly. So what would be your response to Donna's argument, and if not her argument, the larger sentiment out there amongst many of his followers that feel that the fix was in?
Look, I think that the truth is Senator Sanders was able to compete vigorously in a calendar that had been preset before either one of them got into the race, and he lost. And the particular incident that Donna points to is a memorandum of understanding, which notes, which was about a joint fundraising agreement, which was to raise money for the general election, not for the primaries. And Senator Sanders' campaign ended actually executing a joint fundraising agreement with the DNC. They just didn't raise any money for it. I think that was probably the right decision for them, because we were trying to get ready for the general election. He was still behind. He was trying to use all his resources to see if he could somehow overcome Secretary Clinton's lead. And I think that, but the truth is, we raised money for the DNC purposefully, lawfully, consistently with what previous Democratic nominees had done to be used in the general election. And Donna now looks back on that and says that was, that indicated that the fix was in. And I have to say that having worked with her from the time she took over from Debbie Wasserman Schultz till November, I never heard that complaint. Mm-hmm. And I saw her a lot. I actually haven't read the book, so I'm going by what I've seen her say on TV and what I've read is said in the book. But I think that Sanders had a very fair shot at this. I mean, they complain about how many debates there were, but we added debates at his request. And we complain about the fact that they hacked our data file at the DNC. And, I don't really want to refight the 2016 primary. Mm-hmm. I think that he had a fair shot to compete inside a party. And again, He's not even running for re-election as a Democrat, so that the fact that the party was open enough, maybe the Republican Party was open enough to let Trump in. The Democratic Party was open enough to let him compete fairly. If he had gotten more votes, he would have been the nominee. We got more votes, so we were the nominee.
Okay, so Secretary Clinton is the nominee, and you're heading into the general election. Did you, at that point, having looked at the dumpster fire that had been the Republican primary, did you guys start measuring for drapes and saying, these guys have been spending hundreds of millions of dollars killing each other and getting just alienating everybody, driving everybody's negatives up, time for us to move into the Oval Office?
No. We tried to keep Trump from consolidating the Republican vote. You're well aware of the fact that we did substantial outreach to, particularly found fertile ground in the National Security community, and were able to get leading Republicans to endorse her, right, and to business leaders, others who came out and campaigned for her, put their name on the line for her in an attempt to try and to keep him from consolidating the Republican vote. We knew if he did consolidate the Republican vote, the country's kind of split, and it's a pretty competitive election. And he was able, that moved back and forth, but he was able to do that. So we knew this was going to be, we thought we had a lead. We thought we had a lead all along. We thought on election day we were going to win. But we always knew that this was a dogfight, and that he was, he had one significant talent. You see it playing out today, which is he controls the tempo of the game, and he manages to set. And I think with all due respect to my friends in the press, he chummed the water, and they would all jump on the chum. And I have, as I said, I've been with students, so I haven't looked at my Twitter account lately. So he's probably done it from this morning till this afternoon. We've gone from Matt Lauer to something else, and he did that throughout the Republican primaries. He did it. I think he was extremely, even through all the hits he took, through Access Hollywood, through losing 3 debates, he's able to change the conversation by basically being outrageous. And I think it's a talent that I think he honed not just in his days as doing real estate in New York, but particularly in his transition into the television world. It was catnip for the cable television, and it was a challenge. I think Democrats on Capitol Hill are finding it challenging, even literally as we speak. Mm-hmm. It's a challenge to decide: are you going to react to it, or are you not? Can you get airtime by going away from whatever outrage he's just come up with, or do you have to kind of get into challenging, particularly the racist stuff that he was doing? And I think that we knew that was a dilemma. I'm not sure we ever really quite solved it. I mean, it was always, we felt good about the debates, and I think the public polling would indicate that she dominated the debates and won the debates. But that was consolidated airtime where they were both on stage together. Once that was done, and it was done, a few weeks before the election, then he was able to reestablish the tempo of the election. Much has been made, if we're going to do the forensics on the election. I do think that I joked about the hacking, the Russians, the bots, and all that.
We're going to get.
I think that had we are.
Yeah. Okay, we'll get there.
I think that had some I do think that had an effect, and it kind of eats away at you underneath. You don't fully sense it because it's not bubbling up to the mainstream. But the other thing that really was a reversal of fortune for us was the FBI director's decision to reopen the email case. That definitely tightened the race in the last week. But look, you got to be built to be able to win, and we did. Like I said, we got more votes, but we didn't win.
Well, so I want to press. Do you think that it's possible that that candidate Trump's tactics would have not worked well if he was running against anyone other than Secretary Clinton, who had such high negatives already and was
she came out of the State Department. She came out of the State Department with 68% job approval. So
as secretary, but not as
secretary. But I think she got. I think there's another whole chapter of how tough it is, I think, for a woman to be a successful candidate for a chief executive, and the double standard that's applied by the media and by the public to someone. I talked to Sheryl Sandberg about this early in the campaign. There's it's interesting because people when you want the top executive job, people question your motive of why you want it. Mm-hmm. For a woman, that people assume that there must be good pure motive if you're a man, but for a woman they question your motive. And look, I think we tried to. I think she was embraced this time in 2016, a little bit less in 2008. The notion that this was historic. She was running to be the first woman president of the United States. But the hurdles are pretty high to do that. So.
Well, the reason I press you on that point is that the exit polls suggest that a lot of the vote for Trump was really a vote against Clinton. That he consolidated the Republican vote, not because a lot of people liked him or liked his character, but they really were afraid if she won. And in particular, the votes in the Midwest that he was able to flip in those 3 states were those kinds of people. People who were afraid of her.
I think that again, you're asking me to speculate whether I think if you substitute Senator Sanders for Secretary Clinton, it's a different coalition, a different set of problems. Mm-hmm. If you substitute Joe Biden, who has campaigned for us
from Scranton.
From Scranton, campaigned for us many times in Scranton. Could they have done a little bit better in some of those places? Yeah, but they would have done a little bit worse in other places. I think she was a strong candidate, and I think she has tremendous talent. And I think, like I said, I think she ran the race with commitment and with dignity.
So aside from the answer I expect you to give, which is I wouldn't click on that link again, is there another mulligan that you'd like to have? You say, boy, I wish we could have done this or not done that. Is there something looking back you say, maybe if we had done a little bit more of this, that it might have turned out differently? Do you live in regret is what I'm asking here.
Yeah. I think that if I could rewind the tape, and there'd be people who would really argue with me about this, I think we should have published the emails the day the New York Times published the fact that she was using a private server. At that time, we had a copy of them. She had turned them over to
Clinton's emails, not your emails. So Clinton's emails. Yes, okay. And just take that issue off the table.
People could have seen what was there. And they wouldn't have been into all this, 13 months of, trying to scrape through what's this all about. They could have seen what she was, and what you would have seen is a hardworking, diligent, smart, dedicated, and someone who got a lot done as Secretary of State.
Did you propose that at the time, or was there a strong? There obviously was a strong.
Well, the
strong
counter argument was that the State Department requested the emails. We had turned them over to the State Department, and they were now the State Department's emails.
I see.
But I'm not sure what the State Department would have done if we had just published them.
Right.
So it would have been bold and aggressive, but I think we probably should have done it.
Okay, let's talk about the other emails. Can you tell us what happened and how significant, if any, those turned out? That drip from the WikiLeaks turned out to be.
Yeah, I think it
Some people might not know the story, so can you just give the Reader's Digest version of it?
it's long and painful.
Yes.
But and a little bit of a comedy of errors. But there was a phishing email that came from a Russian intelligence service, or people acting on behalf of a Russian intelligence service, that came to my Gmail account through a succession of people who had access to my email account, checked to see whether it was real. I think there's a variety of stories about this, but the cybersecurity guy in our place said, yeah, it's real, click on the link, and they clicked on the link and my emails were stolen. I think we didn't really know that, we didn't know the full extent of it until they started to get published. So there were several months.
Did you think something was wrong right away?
No, the DNC hacks happened first, and there were some documents that were released in that hack that seemed to come from perhaps private email accounts of myself, Ambassador Capricia Marshall, whose emails were also hacked and released by WikiLeaks, and a couple of other individuals in the campaign that looked like something might have happened. But the full extent of that we didn't know until October 6th, I think, when they started publishing all of the contents of my emails. I think that I'm a pretty boring person.
Good chef, but that.
So I think the content of the emails was more gossipy, and the press like playing around with the gossip more than maybe was particularly meaningful. So there was no like smoking gun killer email that hurt us. But I think that people they conflated my emails with her emails and kept the kind of email thing bubbling until, like, as I mentioned, towards the end of the campaign when Comey reopened the investigation of her emails, and then in an unprecedented way, I would add, and was criticized by both Republicans and Democrats for doing it, and that for announcing they were doing that, and then a week later said never mind. But the damage had sort of been done by then. But I think it was really the other active measure by the Russians that hurt us more, which was they were major propagators of fake news and major pushers of fake news in social media. So this, what you're seeing now unpacked in public hearings, with Facebook and Google and Twitter, is the extreme measures they went to take, much of which was related sometimes with real email, sometimes not, but they created a kind of steady stream of fake news that was being pumped both through alt-right media and particularly through Facebook, and they were extremely active on that.
What do you think is the reason that they were doing? What do you think they actually?
I think they were doing that. I have come to the conclusion that the 17 intelligence agencies who came to the conclusion were right, that Putin wanted to hurt her and help him. So I think what began as an exercise, and you've seen we have a former ambassador from Estonia here with us tonight, U.S. ambassador to Estonia here with us tonight. So he's well aware of the fact that they've been operating largely in and in an active fashion in Eastern Europe, in the Baltics, and other places. And other campaigns have been on the receiving end of intelligence gathering operations. Both the McCain and Obama campaigns were hacked in 2008 by the Chinese, but that was for intelligence gathering purposes. I think what was unique is that they moved into the Western context. Now they've repeated that in France and to some lesser extent in the German election, in Catalonia, in Spain, in Brexit. They have now actively engaged in the electoral process and democratic process in Western European countries and now in the United States. As I said, what was different between the Russians and the Chinese was the Chinese wanted to know what probably McCain was going to do on China policy. That was an intelligence gathering operation. Mm-hmm. Maybe, they could figure out the people, they had other motives. What the Russians did was to weaponize the fruits of the hacks to try to influence the election. I think it probably began as an effort really just to undermine people's faith in the electoral process and move to a context in which they were actively trying to damage Hillary Clinton.
Do you think that the Obama administration could have handled that in a different way, in a better way? Do you blame them for not publicizing it more forcefully? I think
what they ended up doing, I think they had a difficult problem because they didn't want to be perceived as trying to be as influencing the election in a partisan way, and I think that was discussed and on their minds. I know that retrospect. Mm-hmm. They decided, I think, to confront, particularly Obama confronted Putin on the other hacking that they did, which was hacking the state voter systems, to push him back and back him off on trying to interfere with the actual conducting of the vote on Election Day.
Mm-hmm. And in your judgment, they did not?
I think, in my judgment, I have no evidence that they were obviously probing these state voting systems, what that was all about, whether that was just to sow dissent in the country or they were really trying to gather something or whether they were trying to use that as a cover for more sophisticated voter communication. I don't know. Mm-hmm. Maybe the Senate Intelligence Committee or Bob Mueller will figure that out. I don't know, but I don't think they interfered with the vote on Election Day. Mm-hmm. That was the context in which I think Obama confronted Putin at the meeting the APEC meeting in China, and that was really what I think they were obsessing about, and I think that gave a little bit of a pass to all this other activity, the propaganda, the interference, the active measures that I mentioned. Now they did it to Macron. I think our experience meant that they did a little bit later. The French media were more prepared for it, and the French law is such that they couldn't really report it because when they finally released they mostly got reported actually on U.S. sites. Right. And because France has a law that there's a go dark period for the media that they can't in the last, I think, 72 hours before the campaign. Mm-hmm. They can't report on new matters before the voters.
Could you all have done better to advertise that this is happening and to discredit some of that stuff?
I think we were screaming from the rooftops about that was going on. The media, I'm critical of the media. I think they like the gossip a lot better than they like covering afterwards, after the election, they're all scrambling to win Pulitzer prizes for trying to figure out what happened, but I think they were not on the ball mm-hmm. for reporting how significant this was during the election. So that's to that. We're really in campaign tactics here. I think the one thing that a different takeaway from my perspective. I don't think I'll ever get asked to do this again, so it's probably earned wisdom that's now particularly useless. I think we were. I was talking about this with the students earlier. I think we largely we spent a lot of money on social media, so did Trump. Our social media strategy, much like Obama's, much like Bernie's, was to go to our core supporters, raise money from them, get them to volunteer, get them revved up, talk to their neighbors, etc. We didn't do a lot of persuasion in social media. We left that to television. I think that left us naked to then the onslaught of what was coming at us in the last 10 days of the campaign, both from Trump and from these outside forces.
So my last campaign tactic question is, Jake Sullivan is reported to have written a memo or raised the question, golly, in the last week, are we going to Wisconsin enough? Are we going to Michigan enough? Are we going to the sections of Pennsylvania enough? Did he actually write that memo? Did he ask that question? And do you think he's right that in hindsight you all should have gone there?
He didn't need to write the memo because President Clinton was yelling about that, well, loud enough for everybody to hear. I think that you have to take the three states differently and the three strategies differently. I think we were overconfident in Wisconsin, and was pushing, and we finally did more. We had a pretty complete field organization, more even than I think President Obama had in 2012 in Wisconsin. But I think we backed off our advertising there. In retrospect, I think we only lost the state by 2,000 votes, so maybe that would have made an effect. In Pennsylvania, we threw everything at Pennsylvania, including tremendous amounts of travel in those places where Trump did well in the so-called Pennsylvania tea. Biden was there, Obama was there, Michelle was there, President Clinton was there, Hillary was there all the time, Tim Kaine was there. So I think, we needed to win all three, and I don't know what more we could have done in Pennsylvania. So the President Clinton, I think, was really the loudest voice for we're slipping with these white working class voters. We need to get more of them back, and I think that was. I think he was. He's a great politician. He was actively observing what was going on. I don't think it was for lack of trying that we didn't get him. We just didn't convert him.
So when did you realize that the effort had lost? So at what point that night? Do you remember? Did you go into that day thinking, "Oh golly, we've lost," or was
No. We went into. I think we went into election day thinking we were going to win, with and so did everybody else. I mean, all the polls indicated we were going to win. It wasn't like our analytics were wrong or the polls were wrong or whatever. I think people thought we were going to win. But we knew the states that were tight. We thought Wisconsin was in a little better shape than it turned out to be, as I mentioned. But we knew that the battleground was essentially Michigan, Pennsylvania, Florida. We thought we had a shot at Arizona. We ended up winning Nevada and Colorado, which were also close. And so I think it was well into the night. So most states were, we competed heavily in North Carolina, but we thought that was a stretch state for us. And we thought we could win it, and we were here the night before the election. Mm-hmm. So we thought it was potential. We had potential to win North Carolina. Glad the governor got over the finish line here, but it was a little bit more difficult for us than those other states. So I think the first time I got, nervous, I guess, was when the Florida results came in and we lost by about a point. Because early vote in Florida looked good for us. And I think that it was really the late-breaking vote in Florida that won the state for Trump. And then the results started coming in those other three states. And I don't know what time it was, but it was, we were trying to rerun our analytics, hold on to hopes that there were votes that were out. I went famously to the Javits Center and told people that we'll wait till tomorrow. At that point, we still thought we had, we thought we were in trouble, but we thought we had an outside chance to still pull those three states back. And then, it wasn't to be.
Was that the hardest speech you've given? That wait here, don't panic?
Yeah.
Okay, so enough of picking at that scab. Let's talk about Trump. President Trump, I'm going to ask an easy question for you and a hard question. The easy question is there an area where he has lived down to your expectations, to your critique, where you say, this is what we were worried about, and here's an example? And is there an area where you say, he's actually been better than we thought? We may have criticized him, but in this area, he's doing better. So how would you answer those two questions? You can pick which one you want to go first.
I have a lot of material on the first.
Okay.
I think I would say that our argument at the end was that he was temperamentally unfit and unqualified to be president. I think we convinced about 60% of the American public that was true. Unfortunately, about a quarter of the people that voted for him held that belief and still voted for him. I think he tries to spend every day proving we were right. Even General Kelly hasn't been able to get his phone away from him. And the temperamentally unfit part is definitely true. I think he's kind of lowered the standing of the United States in the world, and I think he's pursuing policies, having campaigned as a populist. He's got the most plutocratic administration and is pursuing the most plutocratic policies that we've seen really ever. There's no Republican counterpart to what he's doing. And this new tax bill is no exception to that, I think. So that's on the we were right side.
Okay.
I give him credit for saving the Zimbabwe elephants.
Okay.
Pulled that back from Ryan Zinke.
Put that.
I'm happy about that.
Note. Okay, the elephants, but
I think that he, after his false start, particularly on his first European trip, with respect to NATO, he's kind of ratcheted it back and pulled. I mean, I think the realists, the McMasters and Mattis and Kelly, have a little more control over his constant provocation, particularly to our European allies.
Wouldn't you say that his national security appointments are better than you expected? Flynn accepted, but
yeah, that was a big exception. Yeah, I think Mattis was a very wise choice and is doing a very good job. And I think that it's unusual to have so many flag officers in such senior level positions in civilian government. But right now I'm glad they're there. I mean, I think they're a stabilizing force for the government, and I think that they're. I think that they're serving with honor as they have throughout their careers. So those are, I think if you look, I had more hopes for this may sound unusual, particularly given my climate background, but I had more hopes for Secretary Tillerson. But I think that the State Department's are very underperforming. I'm not sure he still has a place at the grown-ups table. I think he's hollowing out the department. You know, even the person he brought in to reorganize the department quit after 3 months. So that's, you know, if you think of national security more broadly, the budget that he's proposed, particularly on development assistance and State Department, is horrible. I think the Congress is likely to reject it. Lindsey Graham chairs the subcommittee on.
Tillerson describes that as the opening bid. You know that they're expecting.
Yeah, 31% cut in you know, essentially the entire sphere of soft power. It's kind of that's a pretty big opening bid. And I think that he's come back to try to defend himself just last couple of days. But they still only have 10 of the top 44 slots filled at the State Department. You have this massive exodus of the most senior career diplomats. And so I think that's actually what seemed like a reasonable pick has turned out to be disappointing. I think that Nikki Haley's doing a pretty good job at USUN. So I mean, I think the once the McMaster replaced Flynn, I think that stabilized the national security team, and it's probably a little bit better than I expected. Yeah.
Well, I'm guessing your answer is Paris Accord, but what is the policy decision that he's done that you most disagree with? Was it the decision to pull out of Paris Accord?
No, I think his assault on his decision that his first priority was to try to destroy the Affordable Care Act. Public pushed back on that, and he got defeated on that. They're trying to unravel it in other places. I think the pulling out of Paris has to be seen in a context in which the overall, both appointments and policy, are in total denial of the science and the fact that climate change is real. So it's the culmination of a strategy to de-emphasize science, to cut the science accounts, to reprogram NASA away from Earth science and towards the Mars mission, to gut NOAA, to appoint Scott Pruitt to the head of EPA, to pull back the Clean Power Plan. I mean, I think it's a symbol of the decision to embrace ignorance at the expense of future planning. And I think that it's actually galvanized the public in a way, and other political actors, Governor Brown, Governor Cuomo, a set of state and local actors, mayors and governors and average citizens, Mike Bloomberg and others on the philanthropic side, to say we're still in, this is a real problem. It's an existential, actually an existential problem. It's a national security problem. We got to get on with it. And that's where the economy is going, is inevitably going. And all we're doing is disinvesting in the future, disinvesting in it from the perspective. The craziest thing he probably did was the executive order pulling back Obama's order that said you couldn't build federal buildings inside the floodplain the week before the Houston floods. Just as a vivid example of I can debate with my former friend, my friends from the Bush administration about we were doing too much, or maybe we were doing not enough, or we thought they were, but at least they accepted physics and arithmetic. And this is an administration that rejects both.
So I have many friends who are avid Trump supporters, and so their explanation for the argument for President Trump has several components to it. One would be the Supreme Court, that he's He's picked a good Supreme Court justice, and he's likely, if he gets another chance or two, he will pick good ones. And that matters a lot to a significant portion of his base, particularly evangelicals. The second pillar of the argument is that the system had failed too many Americans for too long. We had celebrated Democratic president for 8 years, celebrated, at least among Republicans, for a little while, Republican president. Before that, celebrated Democratic president. We've had, 24 years where things just got worse and worse and worse. And what we needed is someone to just break some of the log jams in a Schumpeter creative destruction kind of way. And then we're going to rebuild because the foundations of America are strong. Our basic civic organizations are strong. We'll rebuild it, but you need somebody to break some things that are just stuck. That's the argument. And
I find
isn't there
that
something to that argument?
I find that a little more. I find that excuse a little more relevant to my critique of Tillerson, that he's trying to scramble up the State Department to, dust out the cobwebs and build something new. Than I find it really from the perspective of President Trump. I already said I think the reason he got elected was because people had that anger, that furor. It's not just playing out in the U.S. I mean, Merkel can't get her government together in Germany. It's the uniqueness of the way the French presidential election works that you get a Macron able to come through a runoff style presidential election. But you're seeing it across the board in Europe. You saw it with Brexit. You're seeing it I think the public's part of it's the inability to control the migrant flow in Europe, immigration, which I think is both less of a problem in the U.S. and I think the solutions are more kind of common and obvious, and used to be bipartisan. But there's a palpable anger that the system is rigged, the elites have rigged the system, and that it's not working for working people. He played to that, but he's a hypocrite because he doesn't govern. If he believed all that and wasn't just saying that, then you'd have probably started with infrastructure,
right,
where you'd have bipartisan support and you'd have actually put people to work and you'd bring the country together and make the kind of investments the country needs to create greater productivity and move the country forward. But I don't think he's governing with that in mind. He's governing much more from an authoritarian perspective, I think, than he is from what you would say is someone who is really actually concerned about working people. On the court, I think it's I get it. I obviously don't agree with it, but I get it, and he's having a profound effect down ballot as well. I think that I teach at Georgetown with a Republican judge. I just saw him last night, who was lamenting some of the picks that he's made. He's a very conservative guy, you know him, Dick Leon. Mm-hmm. He's put up a 36-year-old guy in Alabama who's a former speechwriter who's never been in a courtroom to be a trial judge in the U.S. District Court in Alabama. I think he's not going to get confirmed. Right. The ABA, which my conservative friends think is a liberal interest organization, took the unusual step of having a unanimous unqualified rating on this guy. They're putting him forward.
He's married to someone in the White House
He's
Council.
Married to the chief of staff to the White House Council. So I guess that was his credential to be a district court judge in Alabama. I don't understand Alabama politics, and the fact that Roy Moore is still leading in the most recent polls. But at any rate, I think he will have a profound effect there. But I think his biggest effect may be to, more than the judges he puts on the court, will be the way he treats the rule of law in this country. I wrote a post column about this a couple of weeks ago. The tactic of whataboutism. Don't look at me. Investigate Hillary. Investigate your opponent. Do the interference in the AT&T case. The complete disrespect that he showed in first trying to influence Jim Comey to drop the investigation of Mike Flynn and then firing Jim Comey as a result. And you can tell I'm not a big Jim Comey fan, but I think that he has no respect for the boundary of what a president should do in terms of respect for the rule of law. I think it's going to have a profound effect on the country.
Okay, we're going to move now to audience.
Ask your conservative friends about that.
I will. We're going to move now to audience questions, and the mics are in the back there. While they're going to the mic, let me ask one. Is he going to be primaried? Is he going to be the Republican nominee, and is he going to win in 2020? Who will he beat?
I think if he runs, I think he's likely to be primaried. My guess is, I mentioned Kasich. I think Kasich will probably primary him. And, whether, I don't know that you can beat him in the primary. I think he has historically low approval ratings for a first-year president, but he has a solid base of support. And so, he's been consistently now for a while under 40 in the averages of the polls, but he hasn't. But the idea that he'd break under 35 doesn't seem to be on the horizon. So I think it'll be tough to beat him in the primary, but I think it's also very tough to get reelected if you got a 39% job approval rating.
Do you know which Democrat's going to beat him then?
I think there'll be 20 people run, including Joe Biden and Bernie Sanders.
Plenty of employment for you. Okay, let's start here.
Is this on? I don't think the microphone's on.
Okay, just shout and we'll hear you.
Okay. So hi, my name is Nicole Kipralov. I'm a junior studying political science. First of all, thank you so much for being here, Mr. Podesta. Oh, there we go. Okay, so you've talked a lot about Trump, his administration, Clinton, the election. I'm wondering if you can address some of the controversies or maybe just conspiracy theories tied to you, your brother, and the Podesta group. So whether that's your personal email leak as it relates to Pizzagate, the undisclosed 75,000 shares of stock you received from the Kremlin, potentially violating financial disclosure laws, Uranium One being a client of the Podesta group, why your brother left the Podesta group after facing criminal inquiry. As an aspiring person in politics, I'm curious as to how you're dealing with all of these accusations. Thank you.
This is how the alt-right does fake news. And it's personally painful because a lot of this is really total bullshit. And I am sick of I have been, my family and I have been put through this Pizzagate bullshit for a year, which has been totally debunked, by the way. My relationship with the company that you're talking about, which was based in Boston, an American innovative company, I fully disclosed, and Fox has had to correct that twice. I could go down the rest of your list. I have no relationship to the Podesta Group and haven't for 15 years. You can stick with it. And the one thing I will tell you is you have a lot of company on the internet and on Twitter. So have at it.
So do these kinds of, one of the things that keeps these alive is people say, well, there's got to be some fire there with all this smoke. So is there?
That's that.
Is it? But
That
that's what
is-
keeps it alive, right? Isn't it? Partly is that supposition, and then you're saying that also the Russian trolls, alt-right trolls, are
Well,
what creating the smoke.
What I'm saying is, I'm proud of my public career. I've executed with dignity and honesty, and have never been accused of ethical violations. And the people can do what they want to do, and it'll be propagated. I will guarantee you on Alex Jones and these other sites, but it's not true.
Over here.
Does it worry you that Bob Mueller is investigating your brother for his ties to Paul Manafort?
Look, I think my brother. I'm not my brother. Does it worry me? It's painful. I mean, it's firm. After many years in the business, unraveled as a result, I think, of the fact that it was under investigation. I think he made a mistake in getting in business with Rick Gates, who was Paul Manafort's partner at the time. But the difference between the other person who's kind of caught up in this loop is Vin Weber, who was in the Republican leadership in the House, who was the Republican counterpart of my brother. I think the difference is that Vin and my brother Tony registered under the Lobby Disclosure Act, didn't disguise the fact that they had this relationship, and Manafort didn't. So, Mueller's going to do what he's going to do, but it's been sort of a painful episode, I think, for him and for our family.
Over here.
Yeah, so thank you for coming, Mr. Podesta, and thank you again, Professor Feaver, for moderating this discussion. My question, I guess, surrounds Professor Feaver's earlier question when if the Democratic primaries were fixed on an institutional level in accordance with Brazil's claims, and you said that those were largely revisionist and unfounded. I was wondering if you could address the claim that potentially she had leaked debate questions to the Clinton campaign prior, if those are also unfounded.
Well, I think she could speak to that. I mean, it was the truth is that this was the town hall debate that was in Flint, and she had said, I think the email said, the emails are out there, so you can go look at them. That a person who is going to ask a question about having been affected by the lead in the water in Flint, and so be ready for that. Well, I mean, really? I mean, she probably shouldn't have done that. But do you think we weren't ready for someone in a town hall meeting in Flint, Michigan, saying I've been exposed to lead in the water and I'm worried for my children? I mean, so I think it's, that's sort of like I don't know whether she goes into. I didn't as I saw you earlier. I haven't read the book, but I don't think that's like a capital offense one way or the other.
Over here.
Yeah, you talked a little bit about how Trump has been able to control the media narrative and manipulate the press. And I'm wondering, has the press learned any lessons from the 2016 election, and what is the biggest thing that has slipped through?
I think the press in real time challenges misstatements and untruths more vigorously than they did during the course of the election. But I think they still go to the bait. They don't know how to deal with that. And they don't even know how to give it context. But I think they challenge him more quickly when he says something that's just factually wrong, or particularly when Sarah Huckabee Sanders says stuff that's factually wrong from the podium. You see people in the newsroom saying they won't take that as much anymore. So if you tune into those to those sessions with the press secretary. They're challenging the untruths and the falsehoods in real time more than I think they did in the campaign.
Here.
Hello, thanks again for being here. So you talked a lot about Trump's tendency to really recognize the frustrations that happen within a sector of his voting base. And I was curious about this concept of psychic income and giving people, beliefs in your ability to attack the other side without necessarily providing material benefits, which I think is something he does very well. Mm-hmm. And so I was curious how you see the trajectory of Democrats approaching this transition in the 2018 and 2020 elections, and how they can necessarily recognize those frustrations, which are real, without necessarily falling into the same kind of attack rhetoric that Trump sometimes displays.
Yeah, I think that it's very important for, and I think that if you look back at what happened earlier this month in Virginia in particular, New Jersey as well, but in Virginia in particular, having a positive message that you're going to address those problems is critical. Mm-hmm. And having a narrative and a story about that you get it, that you've internalized it, that your priority is going to be to address those messages. I think that if you really rerun the tape and look at Hillary's announcement speech on Roosevelt Island, she was right in that space. And I think programmatically she's right in that space. I think to some extent, a combination of our campaign's tendency to focus on program rather than story, and her tendency to do that too, which her husband was exceedingly good at, being on the other side of that, being on story rather than program, was a lesson that I think people should take into the 2018 elections. It's not really the palm card with whatever the message people on Capitol Hill have come up with the 10-point plan. It's really, you got to have a story about how you're going to improve people's lives, and be emotional about the cause. And as I said, I think he's given the Democrats plenty to work with on hypocrisy, but they can't just be critics of Trump. They got to put forward a positive message.
Last question, very briefly.
Thank you, Mr. Podesta. I just was wondering, I think we could all agree that racial identity was a large factor in the 2016 election cycle. How do you think Democrats and progressives can respond to racial identity politics in an effective manner?
I think that in the end of the day, I actually still believe this is a problem that's going to solve itself. That the country's changing, that the embrace of diversity is a strength, not a political weakness, that the ability to construct a place at the table for everyone is important, that the argument about expanding the circle of opportunity, increasing racial justice, dealing with the legacy of racism in this country is a winning issue, not a losing issue. And I think that there's a slightly different dynamic, but it's race-based also in the questions about resolving the immigration problems in this country. But I think the same fundamentals apply, that people belong, that we're a country that can build a hopeful future that's based on the diversity that America has always been. And I think they're on the wrong side of history. But you have to fight that out on the ground, and you can't ignore both the race signals in the election or the fact that the country is still, we need a bigger share, particularly of the white working class vote, but not at the expense of not addressing racial justice issues at the other side. You got to do both at once, and I think build a bigger and broader coalition.
So I'm going to turn the tables on you and give you the chance to ask the last question. As you heard, we got Ryan Priebus coming on Monday. What question should I ask him?
Did you ever try to tell the president that he couldn't use his telephone.
Okay, I will ask that. Then it only remains for me to thank you, John, and thank you all for coming. Hope to see you all next Monday for Ryan's Priebus, and thank the Phillips family again for their gift. Thank you all. Thank you, John.
Thanks.